Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, April 8th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel withdraws from southern Gaza to prepare for Rafah. So the Israeli military announced on Sunday that it was withdrawing troops from parts of southern Gaza, and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that this step was being taken to prepare for an assault on Rafah, which is the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip that borders Egypt and is packed with over 1 million Palestinians. So Gallant said, quote, "The withdrawal of the troops from Khan Yunis was carried out after Hamas ceased to function as a military organization in the city. The forces left to prepare for the operation in Rafah," end quote. So Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, who's the head of the Israeli military, he said the withdrawal does not mean the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians would come to an end anytime soon. He said, quote, "The war in Gaza continues and we are far from stopping. Senior Hamas officials are still in hiding. We will get to them sooner or later," end quote. So according to the Jerusalem Post, the withdrawal means that Palestinians can move freely in southern Gaza and in the city of Khan Yunis, but the Israeli military is still keeping northern Gaza cut off from the south. So the White House said that the Israeli announcement was likely about rest for the Israeli troops who have been in southern Gaza for 4 months. So John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, said, quote, "As we understand it, and through their public announcements, it is really just about rest and refit for these troops that have been on the ground for 4 months, and not necessarily that we can tell indicative of some coming new operation for these troops," end quote. So if you remember earlier, a few months back, you had Israel withdraw troops from northern Gaza, but they continued to bomb the areas there, and then they ended up launching another siege on the Al-Shifa hospital, which is in northern Gaza. So one thing that this could do is move. It could end up that some of the Palestinians sheltering in Rafah could go to Khan Yunis if that's where they're from. Although we have another story that I'll get to later about how Khan Yunis is just completely destroyed, and the Palestinians returning there are just finding rubble, and there's just nothing for them left there. So it doesn't look like it's a place for them to live. So Israel's plans to attack Rafah have been a source of tension between Netanyahu's government and the White House. We've seen the U.S. say that they don't want them to launch this invasion of this city without a plan for the civilians, but at the same time, there's no indication that the U.S. is threatening any sort of consequences or threatening to cut military support if they go ahead and do it anyway. And you have Netanyahu and other officials in his government saying that they're going to do it no matter what, that they're going to do it even if they lose the U.S. And Rafah, that's where the only border crossing that Egypt doesn't control is. So a big attack on the city would really impact the flow of aid into Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Biden signals no change in U.S. support for Israel. So President Biden said on Friday that Israel was doing what he asked, signaling that he has no plans to alter his policy of full-throated support for the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, despite the killing of an American citizen and 6 other workers for the World Central Kitchen. So a day earlier, this was something I covered in the last show, Biden told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to announce and implement a series of specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. And Biden said that U.S. policy would be determined by the U.S. assessment of Israel's actions to take these steps. So it sounded like, and what a lot of media outlets took this as, was Biden conditioning aid based on what Israel does next. So after the call, the Israeli government announced that it would open the Erez border crossing, which is in northern, so that crosses into northern Gaza. But they said that the step would only be temporary. They said that they would open this border crossing only temporarily. The Israeli cabinet also approved sending humanitarian aid supplies to Gaza through the Israeli port of Ashdod and allowing aid trucks from Jordan to transit through Israel. So it's unclear if these steps will bring any real relief, as Gaza's entire population is facing crisis levels of food shortages. And even the U.S. State Department has acknowledged that famine may already be occurring in some areas of the Strip due to the Israeli siege. And we know children have started to starve to death, and there's the newborn mortality rates. Just so horrific for the children of Gaza. So what they really need is full humanitarian effort. I mean, if they don't get things they don't just need to get aid truck deliveries up to the levels that it was before October 7th, but they need to, do more than that, and they need to end the violence. I mean, that's the key here, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. But what Israel announced that they're doing, it seems to have placated Biden. He seems to be happy and satisfied with what they're doing. He was asked on Friday if he threatened to cut off military aid to Israel, and Biden said, quote, "I asked them to do what they're doing," end quote. He was then asked if he was abandoning Israel, and Biden's reply was he asked the journalist who asked the question if they were serious, which I think that's an honest answer, because if you look at Biden for the past 6 months, it's been 6 months of this now, unconditional, complete, full-throated support, approved over 100 weapon shipments to Israel as they completely obliterated Gaza and are killing all these civilians. And, he's given them as much possible support as he possibly could. So when a journalist asked if he's abandoning Israel, I think his reply, "Are you serious?" was an honest one, because how can you say that Biden, one of the most pro-Israel presidents ever, is abandoning them? So Biden, I just mentioned some of the weapons packages. So, Biden has approved weapon shipments recently, and the most recent one that we know about was actually on April 1st when it was approved. And April 1st was also the day that the World Central Kitchen workers were killed. It was the day Israel bombed Iran's consulate in Damascus, and it was also the day that Israeli troops left Al-Shifa Hospital, leaving it completely destroyed. So unfortunately, I don't think that there's really a big change, and whatever Israel is doing now with respect to the aid is going to be enough to get those U.S. weapons to keep them flowing. All right, so the next one here, Nancy Pelosi signs a letter urging Biden to halt arms transfers to Israel. So former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi joined a group of House Democrats in a letter urging President Biden to halt weapons transfers to Israel until there's a full investigation into the Israeli killing of 7 workers for the World Central Kitchen. So Pelosi's signature is notable because she has been a staunch supporter of Israel throughout her long career in Congress. I mean, this is very surprising for me to see. Of course, I don't think she's had a change of heart. I'm sure it's about elections coming up and all that. But one quote that I put in from Pelosi, this is from 2018, just to show how much she loves Israel. She said a few years ago, quote, "If this capital crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment, our aid, our cooperation with Israel," end quote. So if the capital crumbled to the ground, if Washington, D.C. crumbled to the ground, Pelosi says the one thing that would remain is military aid to Israel. So her signature, another angle, it does seem like the Democratic establishment wants to go after Netanyahu, so maybe this could be part of that strategy. We saw Chuck Schumer calling for early elections. But either way, still, I think it's pathetic for other Democrats that haven't, signed on to this letter. The fact that Pelosi did it before them is really shameful. So this letter was signed by a total of 40 House Democrats, and it called for the U.S. to halt arms shipments to Israel until a full investigation into the killing of these workers is completed. So the letter reads, quote, "In light of this incident, we strongly urge you to reconsider your recent decision to authorize the transfer of a new arms package to Israel and to withhold this and any future offensive arms transfers until a full investigation into the airstrike is complete. If this strike is found to have been violated, if this strike is found to have violated U.S. or international law, we urge you to continue withholding these transfers until those responsible are held accountable. We also urge you to withhold these transfers if Israel fails to sufficiently mitigate harm to innocent civilians in Gaza, including aid workers, and if it fails to facilitate the transport and delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza," end quote. So I just mentioned in the article, the killing of the world's central kitchen workers has gotten all this attention. And, it should have, because it was a horrific crime. But Israel has been doing this throughout these 6 months. Israel has killed over 220 aid workers in Gaza, and that includes 177 employees of the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency. But those are Palestinians, and American politicians don't care when Palestinians are killed. That's just the reality. It's very unfortunate for the Palestinians, but this, they killed a few foreigners, including an American citizen. So I think that's why we're seeing the response that we're seeing. All right, so the next one here, this is a video from Al Jazeera of Israeli forces killing a Palestinian who was collecting aid. And this is a video of Israeli forces who started to open fire on Palestinians who went to grab an aid package that was dropped from the sky, one of these airdrops. And the video shows they started firing at them, and the people started to disperse. And one of them was shot and killed by Israeli forces while carrying, something that he grabbed from the aid that was dropped. So a really horrific video. And this is a pattern. This is something Israel has been doing, is shooting at Palestinians who are trying to get aid. I mean, that just shows how treacherous this situation is for the Palestinians on the ground. And this is all part of the starvation campaign against the Palestinians. All right, so the next story here. Dad of American killed by Israel talks to Blinken. So the father of an American who was killed by Israel in Gaza while working for the World's Central Kitchen spoke with Secretary of State Antony Blinken and told him the U.S. should cut military aid to Israel to end the slaughter in Gaza. So the man who was killed, Jacob Flickinger, he was a 33-year-old dual U.S.-Canadian citizen, and he was killed alongside 6 other World Central Kitchen workers. And just a reminder of the details of this, they were traveling along a route that was approved by the IDF in coordination with the IDF, and they were traveling in 3 separate cars that were clearly marked World Central Kitchen, and an Israeli drone hit every car until they were all dead. So it sounds like a targeted killing of aid workers to me. So Jacob, who was killed, he left behind a wife and a 1-year-old son, which is very sad. So Jacob's father, John Flickinger, told the Associated Press of his conversation with Blinken. I guess Biden was too busy to talk to him. He said, quote, "If the United States threatened to suspend aid to Israel, maybe my son would be alive today. I'm hopeful that this is the last straw, that the United States will suspend aid and will take meaningful action to leverage change in the way Israel is conducting this war," end quote. So you see the picture that his father provided AP, showing, you see him with his family and his son. So Israel said that it dismissed 2 officers and reprimanded 3 others over the slaughter of the aid workers. But they're still claiming that it was an accident, that it was a big mistake. And this is something, so Jacob's mother, she was interviewed by BBC a few days ago, and she said this idea that it was an accident, she said it was a joke, a complete joke, which I agree with. So Jose Andres, the founder of the World Central Kitchen and a celebrity chef, he was interviewed over the weekend as well about this situation, and he said that Israel was waging a war against humanity. And keep in mind, Andres previously defended Israel's conduct in Gaza. This was back in October. But now he has harsh words for the campaign. He said, quote, "This is not anymore about the 7 men and women of World Central Kitchen that perished on this unfortunate event. This is happening for way too long. It's been 6 months of targeting anything that seems to move. This doesn't seem a war against terror. This doesn't seem to be a war about defending Israel. This really is, at this point, seems it is a war against humanity itself," end quote. And so the World Central Kitchen at the organization responded to Israel's steps to dismiss the 2 officers and reprimand 3 other officers. And they said that, they weren't convinced that Israel was really taking any actions to rectify the situation. All right, so the next one here, Gazans return to devastated Khan Yunis. So this article is from AFP. It's on the Daily Mail's website, but it's a AFP article. And it's about the Palestinians who are returning to Khan Yunis. And they say it smells like death. They quoted a woman named Maha Thahar. She is a mother of 4, 38-year-old. She said, quote, "We don't have a city anymore, only rubble. There is absolutely nothing left. I could not stop myself crying as I walked through the streets. All the streets have been bulldozed, and the smell. I watched people digging and bringing out the bodies," end quote. So you can see the pictures of it bulldozed and just the city completely destroyed. So soon after the Israeli army said that its troops were pulling out, people began to emerge into the devastated landscape. The residents of Khan Yunis returning to find out what remained of their homes. Nearly 400,000 people lived in Khan Yunis before October 7th. Much of the area is now in ruins after months of bombardment and heavy fighting. So just more pictures here. This is the Al Salam Hospital, completely destroyed, burned out building. And just some of the rubble here. I mean, it's just completely horrific. What they did to this city. All right, so the next one here, the IDF admits to killing an elderly hostage on October 7th. So this article is from Will Porter. An elderly Israeli woman abducted by Hamas during the group's surprise attack last year was likely gunned down by an IDF helicopter, an internal probe concluded. To date, Tel Aviv has offered few details about other captives who may have been killed in friendly fire incidents. The 67-year-old resident of the Nir Oz kibbutz, Afrat Katz, was taken hostage during Hamas's assault. Footage of the kidnapping show the woman stuffed into the bed of a truck alongside her daughter and 2 grandchildren. In an Israeli military probe published on Friday, the IDF admitted that it had failed to protect civilians. And the probe said that, quote, "It appears that during the battles and the airstrikes, one of the combat helicopters that took part in the fighting fired at a vehicle that had terrorists in it, and in retrospect, according to the evidence, it turned out that there were also hostages in it. As a result of the shooting, most of the terrorists manning the vehicle were killed, and apparently the late Efrat Katz," end quote. So this is something, we know from Israeli media that they were basically given the order to fire on the cars going back into Gaza, whether or not they thought they had Israeli hostages. There's that big Ynet report basically saying the Hannibal Directive was put in place, which means do everything you can to prevent an Israeli from being taken hostage. Historically, that's only been applied to the Israeli military, but it looks like they also applied it to Israeli civilians in the response to October 7th. All right, so the next one here, an Iranian general says that no Israeli embassy is safe. So an Iranian general warned on Sunday that no Israeli embassy is safe as Israel is preparing for a potential Iranian response to its bombing of Iran's consulate in Syria. So this is Major General Yahya Rahim Safavi. He is an advisor to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And he said, quote, "None of the Zionist regime's embassies are safe anymore, and therefore it has so far closed down 28 of its embassies out of fear," end quote. So he appeared to be referring to the There's Israeli media reports. I saw there was one from the Jerusalem Post on Friday that said 28 Israeli embassies and consulates had been temporarily closed due to fears of an Iranian attack. I know earlier in the week there were similar reports that Israel denied, but then now there's new reports saying that they closed down these consulates. So Iran is usually very restrained in their response to Israeli attacks. Israel has a history of killing Iranians in Syria and carrying out covert attacks actually inside Iran, including assassinations, bombings, drone attacks. And again, Iran is usually very restrained. But there's a possible that it's possible they might do something big in response to this, because this was a huge escalation. They attacked an Iranian diplomatic facility, and they killed 7 members of the IRGC, including one very high-level general. So U.S. officials told NBC News that they are concerned Iran might be planning to hit targets inside Israel or an Israeli consulate building in the region. They said the strikes could be launched using a swarm of drones or land attack cruise missiles. So it's just a matter of waiting and seeing what Iran does, what their response is. They're definitely hinting at some sort of response. But at the same time, they know that this is exactly what Israel wants, is to provoke a big conflict that the U.S. would directly intervene in. So I'm sure that's calculated in their response as well. So we'll see what happens. And this wasn't even, there's no indication that Israel bombing an embassy has given the U.S. any thought of cutting off military aid or reducing it. It's just, it was kind of overshadowed by the killing of the world's central kitchen workers. But you would think that it would be a big deal, but it just doesn't even seem like it was that big of a deal to the U.S. All right, so the next one here, 8 killed as Israel strikes across southern Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz. And strikes, this was Friday into Saturday, so like early Saturday morning. Israel launched what seemed to be some pretty heavy airstrikes and shelling, targeting homes and buildings across the area, and 8 people were estimated to have been killed. So some of the people who were killed, we're not sure of all of the casualties, but were members of the Amal movement, which is a Shia political movement in Lebanon. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian drone hits a nuclear power plant. So on Sunday, a Ukrainian drone struck the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is located in southeastern Ukraine and has been under Russian control since February 2022. They took this plant just a few days after invading Ukraine. So the plant's officials said that there was no serious damage in the attack and radiation levels were normal. Rosatom, which is Russia's state nuclear agency, later said that 3 people were wounded in the attack. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which has inspectors at the plant, they confirmed that there was a drone attack. And IAEA chief Rafael Grossi condemned the attack. He said, quote, "This is a clear violation of the basic principles for protecting Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Such reckless attacks significantly increase the risk of a major nuclear accident and must cease immediately," end quote. So this nuclear power plant, it's located on the south bank of the Dnieper River, and on the other side of the river is Ukrainian-controlled territory. And this plant has come under shelling throughout the war. And the way the Western media usually covers attacks on this plant is that, they act like they don't know who's attacking it. Even in the case of this drone, all the stories say Russia alleges Ukraine of launching a drone at the power plant. But Russia controls the plant. I don't see any reason for them to be bombing a nuclear power plant that they control. And you have the IAEA confirming that there was an attack. So Ukrainian forces have also launched several failed attempts to retake the plant. They tried to launch raids across the river. And there was a report from the Times of London, the British newspaper, that the U.S. backed one of these attempts in October 2022 when 600 Ukrainian commandos tried to cross the river. And the report said that the U.S. supported it by providing targeting data so Ukraine could use its U.S.-provided HIMARS rocket systems which hit Russian positions on the southern bank of the river near the nuclear power plant. So, the U.S. backed a failed assault on a nuclear power plant. I mean, you never know what something like that could turn into. All right, so the next one here, Russia repels a major drone attack on a military base. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. It says Ukraine conducted a large-scale drone swarm attack on a military base inside Russia, but Moscow's air defense appears to have downed the UAVs. As Ukrainian forces continue to lose territory across a vast front line, Kiev has increasingly resorted to attacks on Russian soil. So this was on Friday, and Ukraine launched about 50 drones at an airbase in southern Russia. The Ukrainian side claimed that they hit their mark and damaged or destroyed 14 aircraft, but Russia denied the losses and said that air defenses repelled and downed most of the drones. And satellite imagery kind of reflects that. From before and after the operation, it shows no sign of damage to the aircraft or to the base, suggesting that Russia was able to shoot down most of the incoming drones. But we're seeing more and more, Ukraine continues to launch these attacks inside Russia. And there's been reports that say the drone attacks use intelligence provided by Western countries. So Russia views these as NATO-supported attacks, so they could always lead to a big escalation. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine embraces neo-Nazi bad guys attacking Russia. So this article is from Connor Freeman, and it's based on a Politico report. So I've talked about these guys before, the Russian Volunteer Corps. They're headed by this guy. He's got a few names, Denis Kapustin, also known as Denis Nikitin. So he's openly a neo-Nazi guy, and this is basically a neo-Nazi militia, the Russian Volunteer Corps, that is said to be made up of Russians who are fighting for Ukraine. And they've been launching these attacks into Belgorod and Kursk, the neighboring regions, and there's two other militias that have been joining them recently. But there was a Politico recently just had this story that interviewed him, and Connor wrote it up. And really, the funny thing about the Politico report, so these guys are armed with American armored vehicles and other types of NATO weapons. So that's a neo-Nazi militia attacking Russia, the largest nuclear-armed power in the world, with American weapons. I mean, it's completely insane. So the Politico report, the way they frame it, is that Ukraine is cozying up, is using these guys to attack Russia, and that's just a boon to Russian propaganda. It plays right into Russian propaganda. That's what they're concerned about, rather than the actual situation. And they maintain ties with Ukraine's military intelligence, because there's been this some claims from Ukrainian officials that say, oh, we have nothing to do with those guys, even though they clearly do. So it's just something that's been going on kind of a lot lately, and I feel like it's gotten very little attention. I don't think they've been very successful, these ground incursions, but it's something that's been happening. I know in one case, Russia said that they destroyed a few Bradley armored fighting vehicles, so it's just, this risk of escalation. All right, so the last story here, the U.S., the Philippines, Japan, and Australia conduct joint exercises. So the U.S., Japan, the Philippines, and Australia conducted joint military exercises in the South China Sea on Sunday in a provocative show of force aimed at China. According to Japan's Kyodo News, the drills marked the first full-scale exercise between the four nations. And this is what the U.S. military buildup in Asia against China is all about. It's all about alliance building. These are all treaty allies of the United States, but they don't really have their own military relationship, and that's something the U.S. has been really encouraging. And in response, China launched their own patrols in the South China Sea. This was on Sunday. And so, again, this is in the South China Sea. So this is just a huge provocation toward China in these disputed waters where China and the Philippines have had all these tense encounters lately around these disputed rocks and reefs. So we're probably going to see more stuff like this. The U.S. really wants to create like an Asian NATO with these countries and with India as well. and probably throw South Korea in there in their ideal world. So that's kind of the name of the game here. And this comes before, so this week, Biden is hosting Kishida, the Japanese prime minister, and then he's going to host Marcos, the Philippine president, and they're going to hold their first ever trilateral leaders summit, the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines. And they're probably going to announce some new things similar to this. We're just going to see them keep moving in this direction. All right, so that's it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. One from Will Porter. Israel lets AI decide who dies in Gaza, and that's about that report, crazy report about that lavender AI system that Israel uses to bomb Gaza. One from Belen Fernandez. Gaza is one big kill zone. One from Ramsey Baroud. Irremediable defeat on Israel's other unwinnable war. One from Brad Pierce. The CIA admits its long-time presence in Ukraine. And one from Gideon Levy. In 6 months, Israel's war achieved nothing but death. So please go check all of that out. You can always support this show just by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like and subscribe on YouTube or Rumble, Odyssey, wherever you prefer to watch. If you listen to the podcast, you could always leave a review or a rating, depending on where you listen to it. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.